I was mid-sentence when my brother jumped off the bridge. One second we were yelling at each other on the phone, me pacing outside the hospital, him muttering from the other end like he'd already decided something, and the next, the line just went dead. Not dropped, dead, that kind of silence you feel in your bones like the universe stopped breathing. The call log still says 4 minutes and 12 seconds. I remember because I stared at the screen until someone screamed from the nearby overpass, a scream that sounded too much like his name. The last thing he said was, "If I can't be who I am, then what's the point, Eli?" And I had no answer for him because I was too wrapped up in my own fear to give him one. The truth is, I hadn't told a soul I was gay, not my brother, not my parents, not even myself in the mirror without flinching. He had the courage I didn't, and it killed him. It was autumn in Vermont, and the leaves had just begun to bleed gold and blood orange along the ridgelines. It felt wrong that something so horrific could happen beneath such stunning skies. The funeral was small, all hushed voices and side glances, my parents tight-lipped and dry-eyed like their grief had been replaced by shame. They buried him in a wool suit he hated in a town that never knew who he really was. No rainbow flags, no mention of the boy he loved. Just scripture and a eulogy that didn't dare mention the word suicide. I stood there, hands buried deep in my coat pockets, my throat raw from silence. And then just as the wind shifted and carried away the last of the funeral hymns, I saw him, her, standing just at the edge of the woods like a ghost that had come to say goodbye. She had fiery red hair and a leather jacket that looked too worn for someone that young. And when our eyes met, I swear to God, it was like someone had hit play on the part of my soul I thought had died with my brother. I didn't know it then, but that girl, Rowan, was the beginning of the part of my life where nothing would ever make sense again. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't even from our town. But when she walked toward me past the rows of tombstones and slipped a folded letter into my hand before vanishing like mist into the trees, I knew I just stepped into something bigger than grief, something dangerous, something honest. The letter was addressed to my brother, but it had my name on the inside, and it ended with 5 words that felt like fire in my chest. "He loved you, find me." The letter felt too heavy in my hand, its weight pulling me back into the reality I wasn't ready to face. The paper was thick, not the kind you find at a drugstore. This was something personal, something deliberate. I unfolded it with trembling fingers as if it might crack into pieces the moment I breathed on it. The words were scrawled hastily, but the handwriting was sharp, confident, as if the person who wrote them had spent hours choosing each letter. I could barely see past the blur of tears that refused to leave my eyes, but I read it over and over, trying to make sense of it. It wasn't just a note. It was an invitation, or maybe a challenge. Whatever it was, I wasn't ready for it. The letter revealed something I hadn't known about my brother, the life he'd been living behind closed doors. He met Rowan at a poetry slam a few months before everything fell apart. He told her things I hadn't known he had the courage to say out loud. His words, the ones he couldn't speak to me, had been written in this small, crooked handwriting, preserved in a letter I wasn't supposed to find. She knew him more deeply than anyone else ever had, more than even me, and it was devastating to realize how much I'd been blind to. As I stood there, the cool autumn air swirling around me, the world seemed to stretch and pull in ways I couldn't quite understand. I felt seen in a way I'd never let myself feel, like the pain of losing my brother wasn't the end of something but the beginning of a story that was only now unfolding. A part of me wanted to turn and run, to leave the letter in the dirt and pretend it never existed. But something in me, something inherently wrong, wanted to find Rowan. Maybe it was the sudden need to know the parts of my brother I'd ignored, or maybe it was because of the ache in my chest that I could only describe as an instinct to know who loved him when I couldn't. So against all sense, I followed her trail, through the trees, past the cemetery gates. The town was quiet, its streets empty except for the occasional car passing by. I walked for miles, the crisp air biting at my skin, until I reached the old bookstore at the edge of town. It wasn't a place I'd ever noticed before, but there it was, tucked between a laundromat and a bar that served whiskey to lonely men. The light inside was dim, the windows fogged over, but when I pushed open the door, I was met by a rush of warmth. And there, sitting behind the counter, was Rowan. Her eyes met mine the moment I entered. There was no surprise in her gaze, no question of why I was there, just a quiet, knowing look that felt like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. She didn't ask for my name, she didn't need to, she just pulled a chair out from the small wooden table at the back and motioned for me to sit. And when I did, when I finally met her in the dim, flickering light of that strange, musty bookstore, she said the words I never expected to hear. "You're not the only one who's been hiding." The weight of her words pressed against my chest, heavy enough to knock the breath from my lungs. I had to blink a few times, fighting the sting of 1,000 emotions bubbling up at once. Hiding, what did she mean by that? The room was small, too small for secrets that had been kept for years, yet it felt like the kind of place where those very secrets were meant to be revealed. Rowan wasn't what I'd imagined. She wasn't some tragic figure in a leather jacket. No, she was sharp-eyed, confident like she'd known pain and had learned to wear it like armor. Her voice, though, had a tenderness that made my heart ache. "He didn't just love you, Eli," she said, leaning across the table, her hand brushing against mine in a gesture that was both casual and intimate. "He loved you in a way that you never understood because he couldn't show you, but I did." I was about to ask what she meant, about to question her words, when she reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a faded photograph. It was a picture of my brother, Liam, smiling wide, arms around a girl with wild red hair standing on a beach I didn't recognize. The sand was damp, the sky streaked with the deep reds and purples of a setting sun. But what made my heart freeze wasn't just the picture, it was the look in my brother's eyes. He was happy, he was whole. And the girl beside him, the girl I now knew was Rowan, wasn't just someone he had met briefly. She was his world, the one person he had trusted enough to be vulnerable with, to share a version of himself that I had never known. "He told me about you," Rowan whispered, her voice quieter now, as though she didn't want anyone else to overhear. "He said he loved you more than anyone could ever understand. But you were already in a world where you weren't even sure who you were, and he didn't want to force you into something you weren't ready for." The realization hit me like a freight train. My brother had loved me not as a sibling, not as a family member, but in the way you love someone more than anyone should, a love that is raw and untouchable, and yet buried deep in the silence between us. I'd been so caught up in my own battle with my identity, so suffocated by the expectations of everyone around me, that I'd missed the one person who understood me more than anyone else. He hadn't died because of some tragic accident or because of fate, it was because we both were too scared to face our truths, too afraid to admit the kind of love that could have been possible if only we had given it a chance. Rowan's eyes softened, watching me as if she knew everything I was feeling. "He left me with a promise, Eli," she said, placing the photo gently in front of me. "He asked me to find you when the time was right, to show you what you couldn't see back then." My mind swirled with confusion, questions, and emotions I had no words for, but one thing was clear: whatever this was, it wasn't just about Liam anymore. It was about me, too. Rowan's gaze never wavered, and in that instant I realized that I wasn't just standing at the edge of my brother's secret world. I was on the cusp of entering something entirely new, something I hadn't even begun to understand. And I couldn't walk away from it, not anymore, not after everything that had been left unsaid. I don't know how long we sat there, the weight of the photo between us, the air thick with everything left unsaid. Rowan didn't rush me, didn't pressure me with her words, but her presence felt like a steady pull, like the gravity of something undeniable. There were so many questions I wanted to ask her, about my brother, about her, about the love they'd shared, but when I opened my mouth, nothing came out. Instead, all I could do was stare at the photo of them, my brother's sunken eyes smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. And there it was, that question that had lingered at the back of my mind for as long as I could remember. What if I had known? What if I hadn't been so terrified of myself? Could things have been different? Rowan noticed the hesitation in my gaze. Her fingers brushed over the photo lightly, almost reverently, as if it were the last piece of my brother's soul that still had meaning. "I didn't just come here for you, Eli," she said softly. "I came here for him too. Because you need to understand that the love he had for you wasn't something that could ever be erased. And what happened to him, it wasn't just about his struggle, it was about both of you, the way you both kept running from the truth." She paused, her voice trembling slightly now, as if she was revealing something too painful even for her to speak. "He died because he couldn't wait any longer. He couldn't stand seeing you live your life in a cage you made for yourself. He wanted you to see who you were, to be free, to love like he did." Her words stung, raw and unforgiving, and I felt like I was being forced to swallow something I wasn't ready for. "I don't know what to do with all this," I said, finally speaking, my voice shaky. "I don't know how to fix any of it." I wanted to apologize, but the words felt useless. There was no way to take back all the things I'd left unsaid, all the years of denial that had built a wall between me and everything that mattered. Rowan didn't answer right away. She just stood up, walking to the counter where she grabbed a thick leather-bound notebook. When she handed it to me, I saw that it was filled with scribbled poems and drawings, each page marked with my brother's name. "This was the last thing he left behind for you," she said. "Everything he never had the courage to say, every thought he couldn't express. He left it all here for you, and maybe you can finally read it now." I felt the weight of the notebook in my hands, both literal and metaphorical, and something inside me cracked wide open. It wasn't just my brother's voice I was holding, it was my own, the voice I'd buried under years of shame and fear. Maybe I had been hiding too, in ways I didn't even understand. But Rowan's quiet presence, her willingness to share this part of my brother with me, gave me something I hadn't known I needed, a chance to face the truth of who I was. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing on the edge of something new, something mine, and for the first time, I didn't want to run away. It was time to finally stop pretending, to start living the life that had always been waiting for me. And as the autumn wind howled outside, I realized I had no intention of letting the season go. Not until I had uncovered every part of myself, every part of my brother, and everything Rowan was offering me in her quiet, unspoken way. I didn't leave the bookstore that day, not until the sun had dipped low beneath the horizon, painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold. Rowan and I sat together in silence, the pages of the notebook spread between us, the weight of the words lingering in the air like smoke. She didn't say anything more, just let me read. And what I found in those pages was a revelation, a love letter from a brother I had never truly known. Each poem, each sketch was an echo of his unspoken thoughts, the way he'd hidden his feelings, the way he'd hidden me. There were moments in those pages that tore through me, raw and unrelenting. I could almost hear his voice, faint and trembling, as he wrote about the love we never spoke about, the love he had always felt for me. But as the pages turned, something else emerged, an unspoken message from Liam to me, a plea to understand, to finally let go of the fear that had kept us both trapped. He wrote about the shame that gripped him, the fear of being who he truly was, and the guilt he carried for not being able to drag me out of the same cage he was in. It was a love so pure it hurt to read, but it was also a release. I realized then that my brother's death wasn't just his tragedy, it was mine too, but it was also an invitation. He had left me something no one else could give me, permission to be who I was, and in a way to love who I wanted to love. It was a final act of grace, a gift wrapped in sorrow. The last page of the notebook held a single line, scribbled hastily but with the force of a confession. Find Rowan, Eli. It's the key. Those words hit me like a wave, drowning me in the weight of what they meant. I hadn't understood it then, not until now. Rowan wasn't just a person from his past, she was a bridge to something I'd been too afraid to cross. She was the one who had loved him when I couldn't, and now she was showing me that love, holding up a mirror to the parts of me that had remained hidden for so long. When I finally looked up from the notebook, Rowan was standing near the door, her expression unreadable. I knew in that moment that she wasn't just waiting for me to finish the last page, she was waiting for me to decide whether I was ready to stop running, ready to step into the life that had always been meant for me. The autumn wind howled outside, tugging at the trees, urging me to follow it, to chase the season as it faded. But I couldn't, not anymore, not without taking the chance to love as my brother had, to live as he had wanted me to. So when Rowan held out her hand, I didn't hesitate. I took it, feeling the warmth of her skin against mine, knowing this was where the journey began. And in that moment, with the last of the autumn leaves swirling around us, I realized I had never wanted the season to end, not because of the colors or the crisp air, but because for the first time I had found the courage to let the world see who I truly was. And somehow, in the brokenness, in the love that had always been too much for me to hold, I knew my brother was still there, a part of me, urging me forward, urging me to love without fear. The season was ending, but in its wake, something new was beginning. And for the first time in my life, I was ready to let it happen.